Some people walk past suffering without a second glance. Others stop and change a life forever. Ethan Blackwood stepped out of his luxury car, adjusting the cuffs of his designer suit. The world knew him as a billionaire, a young business genius who had turned a small startup into a massive empire. But today he wasn't here for business. Today he just wanted to clear his mind, take a walk through the quieter parts of the city where no one would recognize him. As he strolled down the sidewalk, he noticed people moving quickly, wrapped in their own lives, ignoring everything around them. But then something made him stop. A girl, no older than 10, stood near a bakery window, clutching a single piece of bread close to her chest. Her clothes were worn too thin for the cold wind, her hair unkempt, her small hands trembling from hunger and exhaustion. Ethan watched as she glanced toward a street corner where an old woman sat on a worn-out blanket huddled against the cold. The girl hesitated, looking down at the bread in her hands, before forcing a smile and walking toward the woman. "Grandma, I brought you something to eat." His heart clenched as he realized the truth. The little girl was hungry too, but instead of eating, she was saving it for her grandmother. Ethan followed at a distance, watching as the girl knelt beside the older woman, breaking the bread into 2 pieces before placing one in the frail hands of her grandmother. The woman smiled weakly, brushing a hand over the girl's hair. "My sweet child, you should eat first." The girl shook her head. "No, Grandma, you need it more." Something inside Ethan shifted, a memory surfacing from years ago, a time when he too had known hunger, had watched his own mother sacrifice her meals so he wouldn't go to bed starving. That life had felt like a lifetime ago, buried under layers of wealth and success, but standing there watching the little girl, he felt that same ache deep in his chest. Without a second thought, he stepped forward. The girl noticed him, her wide eyes filled with both fear and defiance, as if she had learned not to trust strangers. He knelt to her level, offering a small reassuring smile. "Hi, I couldn't help but notice you and your grandmother. Is everything okay?" The girl hesitated, then nodded slowly. "We're fine." Ethan glanced at the older woman, who was clearly anything but fine. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet, flipping through the crisp bills. He had spent thousands on a single meal without a thought, yet here was a child giving away her only food without hesitation. He handed her a bill, enough to buy weeks' worth of food. "Here, take this. Get something warm to eat." But the girl didn't move. She looked at the money, then back at him, her lips pressing together. "I can't take that." Ethan frowned. "Why not?" Her small voice was firm. "Grandma always says we shouldn't take from people if we can't give something back. That's not fair." His breath caught in his throat. Of all the things he had expected to hear, this wasn't one of them. Most people would have grabbed the money without hesitation, but this little girl had more dignity than people with millions in their bank accounts. He put the money back into his wallet, thinking for a moment before pulling out a business card. "My name is Ethan Blackwood. I own restaurants across the city. I have a job for you and your grandmother. You don't have to take anything for free." The girl's eyes widened. "A job?" He nodded, smiling warmly. "Your grandmother can work as a hostess. She won't have to lift anything heavy, just welcome guests. You can help after school. Maybe learn how to bake in our kitchens. It'll be your first step towards something better." The girl turned to her grandmother, who was already wiping tears from her eyes. Hope, something she probably hadn't felt in years, flickered across her face. "Child, if this man is truly offering, we should listen." Ethan's chest tightened, knowing he had made the right choice. "Here's what we'll do. I'll take you both for a warm meal right now, then we'll get you a place to stay. No more sleeping outside. You're going to have a home again." The girl stared at him, her small fingers clutching the business card before she finally whispered, "Thank you." Months later, Ethan walked into one of his restaurants, greeted by the familiar sight of the once homeless grandmother standing at the entrance, smiling as she welcomed guests. The little girl, now dressed in a clean uniform, stood behind the counter, carefully decorating pastries under the guidance of a chef. She looked up, spotting him, her face breaking into the brightest smile. "Mr. Blackwood." He grinned back. "How's the baking going?" She held up a small cake proudly. "I made this one myself." Ethan took a piece, savoring the sweetness before nodding in approval. "You might be better than my chefs one day." The girl beamed with pride, and as he watched her laughter fill the restaurant, he knew one thing for certain. Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness create the biggest changes, and sometimes the ones who have the least to give are the ones who deserve the most. Some see kindness as charity, others see it as an investment in a life worth saving. Ethan sat in his office staring at the reports in front of him. The restaurant chain had been growing faster than ever, profits soaring, expansion plans rolling out across the country. But right now, none of that mattered. What mattered was the small framed picture on his desk, a photo of the little girl and her grandmother taken on the day they officially became employees of his company. It had been months since he found them starving on the streets, months since he made a promise to change their lives. And today, as he walked through the restaurant's doors, watching the girl happily arranging fresh bread in the display case, he knew that promise had been fulfilled. She noticed him immediately, her face lighting up with excitement. "Mr. Blackwood, I saved you a piece of my new recipe." Ethan chuckled as she eagerly handed him a small loaf of sweet bread. He took a bite, savoring the flavors, and nodded approvingly. "This is really good. You've got talent, kid." Her smile widened. "I've been practicing every day. The chefs say I could run my own bakery one day." Ethan crouched to her level. "You will. But you won't just run it. You'll own it." The girl's eyes widened. "Own it?" He pulled out a folder, placing it on the counter. "Inside are the details for a bakery I'm opening, and I want you to help me run it. You and your grandmother." The girl stood frozen, unable to believe what she had just heard. A bakery of their own. A real chance at something more. Ethan gestured toward her grandmother, who had just stepped up beside her. The restaurant had become her second home, and she had grown stronger since the day he found them. She placed a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder, her voice filled with emotion. "Child, do you understand what this man is offering you?" The girl looked between them, her voice barely a whisper. "But why? Why would you do this for us?" Ethan smiled, leaning on the counter. "Because I believe in you, and because someone once helped me when I had nothing. Now it's my turn to do the same." Her hands trembled as she picked up the folder, flipping through the pages, staring at the plans for the bakery. She had never imagined something like this would be possible, not after everything they had been through. Tears filled her grandmother's eyes as she turned to Ethan. "You didn't just save us from the streets. You gave us a future." Weeks later, the bakery was ready to open. The girl had worked alongside Ethan, learning everything from business operations to baking techniques. She had thrown herself into every detail of the shop, from the menu to the decorations to making sure it felt like home. On opening day, the bakery was packed. Customers lined up at the doors, excited to try the pastries baked by the little girl with a story that had inspired an entire city. The grandmother greeted guests at the entrance, her heart swelling with pride as she watched her granddaughter's dream come to life. Ethan stood quietly in the back, watching it all unfold. A woman approached him, an investor he had met years ago, with a curious smile. "You've built an empire, Blackwood. Why put so much time into one little bakery?" Ethan took a deep breath, glancing at the girl behind the counter, who was now taking orders like a true professional. "Because some investments aren't about money," he said. "Some are about people." The investor nodded, impressed. "You might be onto something, Ethan." As the bakery flourished, the girl became more confident, more determined to prove that she wasn't just lucky, she was worthy of the opportunity she had been given. One evening, as she and Ethan locked up for the night, she turned to him, hesitating for a moment before asking, "Mr. Blackwood, what if I fail? What if people stop coming? What if I can't make it on my own?" Ethan looked down at her, his expression serious. "Let me tell you something, kid. When I was your age, I was afraid too. Afraid I wasn't good enough. Afraid I'd lose everything. But you know what kept me going?" She shook her head, watching him intently. "The belief that failure doesn't come from falling. It comes from not getting back up. And trust me, you're the kind of person who always gets back up." She swallowed hard, nodding slowly, absorbing every word. "Good," Ethan smirked. "Because one day I expect you to be standing where I am, helping someone else, the way I helped you." She grinned. "I will, Mr. Blackwood, I promise." Ethan smiled, satisfied. Because some promises are meant to be passed down through generations. Some people wait for change. Others become the change that others desperately need. Months passed, and the bakery quickly became one of the most popular spots in the city. Customers lined up not just for the warm pastries, but for the story behind it. A young girl who had once been starving on the streets now ran a business built on resilience, kindness, and second chances. Ethan Blackwood often visited quietly, watching from a distance as she worked. Her confidence had grown and her skills had sharpened. She was no longer just a girl with a dream. She was becoming something more. One evening, as she and her grandmother were closing up the shop, Ethan walked in just as they were flipping the sign to closed. The girl grinned when she saw him. "Mr. Blackwood, you're late. We saved you some of your favorite bread." Ethan chuckled, taking the warm loaf from her hands as he glanced around the bakery. It smelled of cinnamon and sugar, of late nights and hard work, of a future built from nothing but determination. "You've done well, kid, really well." Her grandmother nodded proudly. "She runs this place better than I ever could." The girl smiled, but there was something in her eyes, a flicker of hesitation Ethan noticed immediately. "What's on your mind?" She hesitated before speaking softly. "I want to open another one." Ethan's brows lifted in surprise. "Another bakery?" She nodded quickly. "I've been saving the profits, planning everything. I know how to run this one, but I want to bring it to a new part of the city, a place where other kids who struggle like I did can find hope too." She paused, searching his face for a reaction. "I know it's risky, but I don't want to stop here. I want to grow." Ethan's chest swelled with pride. He had seen ambition before, but there was something different about hers. It wasn't about wealth or success. It was about giving others what she had once needed desperately, a chance. He leaned against the counter, crossing his arms. "You remind me of someone." She tilted her head. "Who?" Ethan smirked. "Me, when I started my first business, everyone told me to wait, to slow down. But I didn't listen because I knew I had more to give. And guess what?" She leaned in, eager to hear the answer. "I was right." Her eyes lit up with excitement. "So does that mean?" Ethan nodded. "Let's do it." With Ethan's backing and her growing reputation, the second bakery opened faster than anyone expected. But this time, it wasn't just about selling pastries. It was about hiring young people who needed work, training kids from struggling families, giving them the same opportunity she had been given. She wasn't just a business owner anymore. She was a leader, a mentor, just as Ethan had been for her. News outlets picked up her story, calling her the youngest bakery owner in the city. Business leaders reached out, inspired by how she had turned her struggle into success. Even Ethan's own investors watched closely, impressed by what she was building. One day, after finishing a long shift at the new location, she sat across from Ethan at a cafe, sipping hot chocolate as she stared out at the bustling city. "I still can't believe this is real," she murmured. "When I was little, I thought I'd never make it past tomorrow. Now I'm thinking about next year, 5 years, 10 years. Ethan smiled. "That's how you know you've made it, when you stop just surviving and start planning for the future." She turned to him, eyes filled with gratitude. "You saved my life, Mr. Blackwood. I don't know if I'll ever be able to repay you." He shook his head. "That's where you're wrong. You've already repaid me, because one day you'll do the same for someone else." Years passed, and the little girl who once clutched a single piece of bread in the cold was now an inspiration to thousands. She had expanded her bakeries across the country, creating jobs, building opportunities, and changing lives. One evening, as she walked into her very first bakery, she saw a young boy sweeping near the counter, his clothes worn but his determination strong. She watched as he hesitated near the bread display, looking at the food, the same way she once had. A memory flashed in her mind of the night Ethan had found her hungry and afraid. She stepped forward, smiling softly. "Are you hungry?" The boy looked up startled, then nodded hesitantly. She grabbed a loaf of warm bread, wrapping it carefully before handing it to him. "Here, no charge, but if you ever want a job, the door is always open." The boy's eyes widened in disbelief. "Thank you." She ruffled his hair gently, smiling. "Just promise me one thing." He looked up at her, waiting. One day, when you're able to help someone else, do it." He grinned, nodding eagerly. "I will." As she watched him walk away, her heart felt full. She had finally understood what Ethan meant. Kindness doesn't just change one life, it creates a ripple that never ends. Some people receive kindness and move on. Others carry it forward and change the world. Years had passed since the day Ethan Blackwood found a hungry girl clutching a single piece of bread on the street. That same girl was now a respected businesswoman running one of the most successful bakery chains in the country. She had gone from struggling to survive to providing opportunities for others. Her story had inspired thousands, but she never let success make her forget where she came from. One evening, as she stood outside the very first bakery she had ever owned, she felt a sense of nostalgia. This place had been the beginning of everything. The moment Ethan had believed in her, had rewritten her destiny. A car pulled up to the curb and she smiled as the door opened. Ethan Blackwood stepped out, dressed sharply but with the same easy confidence he had always carried. They exchanged a knowing look before he spoke. "Looks like you didn't need my help after all." She chuckled, shaking her head. "I needed it more than you know, but now it's my turn to do the same for others." Over dinner, they discussed expansion plans, future investments, but mostly they talked about legacy. Ethan had built his empire on innovation, but she had built hers on compassion. What they had in common was simple. They never forgot the power of a second chance. Ethan leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "You've done more than I ever imagined. The bakeries, the programs, the way you mentor kids who grew up like you did. It's bigger than business now." She nodded. "It has to be. No one else was going to create opportunities for people like me, so I did it myself." Ethan smiled proudly. "That's exactly why I wanted to meet with you. I'm stepping back from some of my businesses. I want to invest in people who can carry the vision forward, people like you." Her eyes widened. "You mean?" He nodded. "I want to fund your expansion nationwide, but on one condition. You keep doing it the way you've always done, not just as a business, but as a movement." Her heart pounded at the idea, not because she doubted herself, but because she knew this was the moment everything changed again. Months later, a press conference was held where Ethan Blackwood and the young bakery owner announced their partnership. It was more than just an investment. It was the beginning of something new, a brand dedicated to hiring and training underprivileged youth, creating opportunities for those who had been overlooked, building something that truly mattered. The media went wild. The headlines spoke of the young girl who had once been homeless now sitting beside a billionaire as a partner, not a charity case. She had earned her place not by luck, but by determination and kindness. As she sat beside Ethan answering questions from reporters, she felt a sense of pride, not just for herself, but for every person who had ever struggled and fought for something better. This wasn't just about bread or business. It was about breaking cycles and changing lives. Years passed and the impact of their work spread nationwide. Every city had a bakery that didn't just sell pastries but served as a safe haven for struggling families. The young girl was no longer just a business owner, she was a symbol of hope. The little boy she once helped now managed his own bakery. The employees she had trained had gone on to mentor others. The cycle of kindness had never stopped growing. One night, as she walked into her first bakery alone, she saw an old newspaper clipping framed on the wall, a photo of her younger self handing bread to her grandmother with a headline, "From hungry child to bakery mogul." She reached out, brushing her fingers over the glass, remembering what it felt like to have nothing. Then she whispered softly to herself, "We did it, Grandma." A voice spoke behind her. "Thought I might find you here?" She turned to see Ethan standing in the doorway, smiling warmly, still working late. She laughed. Some things never change. Ethan walked over, glancing at the framed newspaper. "It's funny, isn't it? All of this started because you wouldn't take free money from a stranger." She smirked, shrugging. "I never wanted a handout, I just wanted a chance." "And that's why you made it," Ethan said. "Because when people gave you opportunities, you turned them into something bigger than yourself." She nodded because she knew it was true. Her success had never been about just her. It had always been about everyone she could lift up along the way. That night, as she locked up and stepped into the city lights, she realized she was no longer the girl clutching a piece of bread in the cold. She was the woman making sure no child ever had to feel that way again. Because kindness wasn't just something you received, it was something you passed on forever. Some people wait for their lives to change. Others take the kindness they receive and turn it into something even greater. The bakery empire had become more than just a successful business. It was a movement, a symbol of second chances and the power of believing in people who had been overlooked. The girl who had once gone hungry on the streets was now a leader, a visionary, someone who had transformed a single moment of generosity into a legacy that would last for generations. One evening, she stood on the rooftop of her newest bakery, overlooking the city lights. Beside her stood Ethan Blackwood, the man who had given her the chance that changed everything. They had come a long way from that fateful night when he found her starving on the sidewalk, clutching a piece of bread for her grandmother. Ethan took a deep breath, looking at the skyline. "You've built something incredible, something bigger than either of us imagined." She smiled. "But it's not finished yet. There's still so much more to do." He smirked. "That's what I like about you. You never stop thinking about the next step." The next step came faster than either of them expected. One morning as she walked into her office, her assistant handed her an envelope. "You're not going to believe this." She opened it and her breath caught. It was an invitation to speak at a global entrepreneurship summit. World leaders, industry giants, the most powerful business minds on the planet, and now she had been invited to stand among them and share her story. When she called Ethan to tell him, his response was simple: "You were always meant to be in those rooms." But it wasn't about the fame, the prestige, or the recognition. She accepted the invitation because she knew this was her chance to spread the message even further, to show the world that success wasn't just about wealth, it was about what you did with it. At the summit, she stepped onto the massive stage in front of thousands of people, taking a deep breath before she began. "I was once a child on the streets, hungry, afraid, invisible. But someone saw me when no one else did, and instead of pitying me, he gave me something far more valuable, a chance." The room was silent, hanging on to every word. "That chance led me here today, not just as a business owner, but as a mentor, a leader, and a believer in the idea that no one should be defined by their worst day." She paused, looking out at the crowd. "And now I spend every day making sure that kids like me don't just survive, but thrive." The applause was deafening, but what mattered most wasn't the applause. It was the young entrepreneurs in the audience who would leave that room ready to make a difference. After the summit, investors from around the world reached out wanting to be part of what she was building. Schools asked her to speak to students. Nonprofits wanted to collaborate. But what truly moved her was a simple handwritten letter that arrived at her office a week later. "Dear Miss Blackwood, my name is Jordan. I'm 12 years old. My mom and I have been struggling for a long time, and sometimes we don't have enough to eat. But I read your story in the newspaper, and it gave me hope. One day I want to start a business just like you so I can help other people too. Thank you for showing me that life can change. Sincerely, Jordan." She held the letter tightly, tears pricking her eyes. This was why she did what she did. Not for money, not for recognition, but for kids like Jordan who just needed to see that a better life was possible. Years later, she stood in front of a brand new building, the Blackwood Center for Youth Entrepreneurship, a place where kids from underprivileged backgrounds could learn business skills, receive mentorship, and get the opportunities she never had. Ethan stood beside her, hands in his pockets, a proud smile on his face. "You know what I think." She smirked. "What?" He gestured to the building. "This isn't just success. This is how you change the world." She took a deep breath, letting the moment sink in. Because he was right. The hungry girl on the street had become someone who created opportunities for thousands. And as she cut the ribbon, officially opening the center, she knew this was only the beginning. Because kindness never ends, it just keeps growing.